Welcome to Break the Needle. I'm your host, Adam Zivo, and I'm here to tackle Canada's problems with addiction and crime. Today, we're going to talk with Callum Bagnall, a student and former drug user whose dependency on opioids was fueled by easy access to diverted safer supply drugs. For context, safer supply refers to the practice of distributing taxpayer-funded recreational drugs to addicts under the assumption that this dissuades use of riskier street alternatives. This predominantly means handing out large volumes of hydromorphone, an opioid as powerful as heroin. Canada began to widely provide safer supply from 2020 onwards, although within a few years it was discovered that these programs were being widely defrauded and that a significant portion of their hydromorphone pills were simply being resold on the black market. While British Columbia restricted access to safer supply in early 2025, the experiment continues to run in Ontario, where Callum is based. Welcome to the show, Callum.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
Now, how did your addiction begin, and what were you initially addicted to?
My addiction sort of began in 2019 to 2020, mainly with experimenting with Percocets, and then it kind of graduated to doing auxies and stuff in 2020 to 2021. And near the beginning to the middle of 2021, I sort of got, I ran out of money, and I had been working with a guy who was in public housing, and he knew a lot of people who were on safe supply. And he said, "Hey, man, if you run out of money, these guys are getting them for free. They'll basically, if you give them a few dollars, they'll give you a pill, you know."
And what was your reaction when you learned about this?
At first, I was taken aback. I said, like, "Is that real? Is that that can't be a thing, can it?" And he said, "No." Like, I was surprised too, but it's a real thing, and if you come here, you can find out.
And how did you buy your safer supply? Did it come in prescription bottles? What were the amounts that you were buying these drugs in? Sketch for us just what this actually looked like in practice for you.
hmm it did come a lot in pill bottles. Sometimes they'd rip the name off the label, or they'd cover it up with Sharpie. Sometimes not so much. And there was usually a good amount. They always had. You had to be quick to get the dilaudits. They would run out pretty quickly. They were very popular, but the morphine pills, the slow release morphine pills, and the slow release hydromorphone pills, those were always in stock. So you could buy those extremely cheap because nobody really wanted them. And those ones are strong too. They're like 100 milligrams. So near the end, I was mixing and matching both. So I would buy like probably around like 30 to 50 dilaudits mix in with 30 to 50 Cadians or Eslons.
Okay, and just for clarification, Dilaudid is the brand name for hydromorphone, the short-acting drug that has been distributed through these safer supply
Yeah.
programs. Now, how much did these pills cost for you when you purchased them from Safe Supply versus what it was like to buy them on the streets before safer supply became widely prevalent?
Um, Before it came widely prevalent, hydromorphone pills, especially the dilaudits, were pretty expensive. Like, I remember being sold a couple times 8 milligram dilaudits for about $10 to $15 a pill, sometimes more. And the slow release sort of hydromorphones and morphine pills were very hard to come by. They only really, most people only got it for major surgeries and stuff. So you never really came across that until Safe Supply came around. And then, then you could get as many as you wanted, essentially, as long as you knew who had them, or if your dealer was trading with somebody who was on Safe Supply, because that was another way it got into the market as well.
And just for a quick clarification, it was a well-known truth within these addiction circles in London, Ontario, that Safe Supply was being widely trafficked.
Oh yeah, it was well known. Like I sometimes I would even mention it when I would go to pick them up. I'd say, "Isn't this crazy that this is still going on?" They'd be like, "Yeah, it is, but might as well just go along with it while it's here."
Yeah, I mean, there are a few things as insane as some of the public policies we've seen recently when it comes to addiction and mental health. Now, obviously, this destabilized you. We're going to get more into that when we get back from the break and understand how safe supply negatively impacted your life. And we're back with Callum Bagnall, a student and former drug user whose opioid addiction spiraled out of control after he gained access to diverted safer supply opioids that had initially been given away for free by the government. Now, Callum, once you began using these drugs, how did your addiction escalate?
It escalated very quickly. So it took me a while, actually. Almost the same amount of time it took me to go out of control with the safe supply. It took me to go from taking just like Percocets and stuff to taking, like one oxy a day or two. But when I started taking, safe supply in the same amount of time, I got all the way up to taking the night before I went to rehab. I was able to take 20 of the slow release 100 milligram morphines, and I was actually annoyed that I didn't have any recreational benefit from it. Uh, and I was able to mix the instant release dilaudid with the slow release morphines and Eslons. So I could do like about 10 to 15 of the slow releases with the 100 milligram pills, and then I'd be able to take another 10 to 15 of the 8 milligram instant dilaudid, and that was kind of like my my almost daily habit at the time.
Now, Callum, what impacts did this have on your life using this much dilaudid and this insane number of opioid pills?
Well, you said the word destabilized earlier. It was destabilized for sure. There's your whole life sort of around revolves around getting more of it, and it really it messes up your whole day. That it got so bad at one point where I would be withdrawing in the morning when I woke up.
And how many pills do you estimate you purchased over the course of your addiction from Safer Supply specifically? And how much money did you
Mm.
spend on these pills?
Oh, thousands. It it had to be because I was able to buy at least like 100 pills or more a week, um, and sometimes more. And it people would give me deals sometimes too. Like one time I went over and the guy told me, "Hey, I'll give you 80 dilaudid for $100." So sometimes you would get those really good bulk deals. So yeah, like thousands and thousands of dollars, over time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So we'd have thousands of pills that were being trafficked to you specifically, and that's just a drop in the bucket of the overall number of Safer Supply pills that are being trafficked on the black market in London, Ontario, and in Canada more generally. Now, did you see any indication that organized crime was involved in the diversion and trafficking of Safer Supply drugs?
Yeah. Yeah. Like I knew of dealers that would ask people, "Hey, if you're going to these places, if you can get multiple people to sell you their scripts, I'll buy them off you, or I'll trade them with you for something that you want." So dealers were taking advantage of it. They knew all about it.
And where were they reselling these drugs? I recall that the last time we spoke, I actually made a documentary with you. For people who are watching, you don't know. You
Mhm.
said that they would buy some of these drugs for very cheap in London, Ontario, where Safer Supply was available, and then resell them in Northern Ontario, where it was still
Mhm.
expensive.
Yes, yes. I knew of many people who would, they would drive them up to Thunder Bay or North Bay or Sudbury, because a pill up there is a lot less. It's a lot less prominent. There's not many of them, so you could sell them. You could buy them for $1 to $5, and then sell them for $15 to $30 a pop. And people would just
Mhm.
rent a motel and sell them out of there, and then come back down.
Okay, so even though Safer Supply is not as widely available in Northern Ontario, this harm reduction experiment is still harming people throughout the province because drug traffickers are purchasing large volumes of Safer Supply from cities like London and then moving them to communities where Safer Supply is not being prescribed.
Yeah, yeah. Um, that's definitely happening. It has to be at least at some level because, dealers understand differences in cost, right? They know that if they're selling fentanyl to somebody, they could trade it for little to no cost themselves because they get it for so cheap, and they know that people are on the safe supply pills don't want them, uh, and they also know that up north, Northern Ontario, drugs are more expensive. Everything,
Mhm.
cocaine, crack, pills, right? So they think, well,
No,
if
no,
I'm
no,
already going up
Callum. We're
there
going to go to break, but
for
when we get back, we're going to talk about how harm reductionists are trying to romanticize diversion and what you think about that attempt.
oh yes, I know about that.
And we're back for a conversation on safer supply diversion. Our guest today is Callum Bagnall, a former drug user who actually used many of these diverted safer supply drugs. He claims that he took thousands of these opioid pills over the period of about a year or two. Now, Callum, some harm reduction activists claim that safer supply diversion should be tolerated because, in their view, it merely amounts to compassionate sharing. What do you think about this?
I think that rarely really happens. Like maybe if somebody is friends with another person, that might happen, but it's not the main reason why pills are diverted. Most people respond to incentives, like if I have something of value, why would I give it away for free? Especially if I have a habit I have to meet, right? Most people are just trying to sort of like get their fix by the end of the day. So I would say a lot of it is mainly because of the money or the drug factor, not really because of compassionate sharing. Because
Mhm.
each individual person could go get that safe supply script if they're addicted to drugs. It is very easy to, so why would they need to have compassionate sharing, right?
And in our previous conversations, you described purchasing safer supply drugs from a supportive housing building where the environment was not exactly compassionate, where there was a lot of antisocial behavior,
Yes.
predatory behavior, children being neglected. And in that situation, it's hard to imagine that people are motivated more so by compassion than by a selfish desire to use whatever drugs they can.
Yes, I agree. It is very it's there's no real guardrails there. Like there's the building is just on its own. The building staff can't do anything uh, about any sort of altercation. So people will sometimes they'll owe their dealer that's on the same floor, and if they owe him and they're getting a safe supply script and they have to pay him back somehow, they have to give it to him. So that
Okay.
that happens a lot.
Now, many harm reduction activists have denied for years that safer supply diversion is a significant issue. What do you think about that? What would you say to these individuals?
I would say it is a significant issue, especially if you would never prescribe this many pills of Suboxone pills or this much methadone to somebody, or even if somebody had cancer, you would not prescribe them this many pills. So
Mhm.
it is a significant problem.
And so you are currently on methadone or Suboxone. You're on a traditional opioid medication. From my understanding, of course, methadone is very tightly monitored, right? So you have to consume these drugs under supervision until you build a rapport with your doctor. And then eventually you're allowed to take these drugs home to use as intended. But that's not the case with safer supply, right? There aren't very many guardrails in place.
Yes, there aren't many. They that sometimes they're even doing phone call scripts. They get take homes for sometimes even for the week. Like I knew people that would get their whole script for the entire week on Monday, and they're getting many pills a day, like upwards of 50, depending on how many slow releases that they're being given with the dilaudid. I bet at least as a minimum, they're getting 30 dilaudid and another 20 slow releases. But I'd seen people getting as many as 70 a day and getting them all on Monday. So Monday was like the day you would go to buy them, and you'd get a lot, and you had to be quick because a lot of other people go there too.
Mhm. And the federal government has claimed that criticisms of safer supply are rooted in fear and stigma.
Mhm.
Does that seem like a fair assessment to you?
I would say it's not a very fair assessment because
Mhm.
all you would need to do is just look at the production, or even like the, not the production, but more like the amount of opioids that are being purchased by pharmacies that fill safe supply scripts. If that was publicly available, it would be a lot. From what I saw, there's no way that it's just fear. I
Mhm.
would say that what they should be more concerned about is the fear of somebody who lives in some of these supportive housing buildings and they owe their dealer money for fentanyl and they're on safe supply. That's the fear that I would say is more important, because that
Mhm.
person has to make that money by the end of the day, the end of the week, or else their dealer will, punish them. And
Mhm.
that is real consequences.
Now, Callum, when we get back from the break, we'll talk about the implications for the rest of Canada and what you think the government can do better to run this program more responsibly, if it should be run at all. And we're back with Callum Bagnall, a former drug user who abused a very large supply of safer supply opioids that were sold to him on the black market. These drugs originated from programs where they were given away for free by the government. Now, Callum, what message would you have to Canadians across the country regarding this program?
That it is in a lot of our towns, especially the big ones, that it is not some sort of obscure, only a few people are taking it, because that's a lot of times it gets framed as this, oh, it's only a few people, it's not that big, it's not that, it's not expanded that much, it's a big problem. And if people like me aren't buying these pills and their dealers are getting a hold of them, who are they reselling them to? Who is getting these pills after they get bought by dealers? They could end up at schools, at colleges, at parties where people are drinking and they don't have a tolerance to opioids. These pills are very, very powerful. If you don't have a
Mhm.
tolerance to them, they'll make you sick if you take them for the first time with no tolerance. So
Well,
I think it's a very big problem.
yeah, Callum, you said that people would receive, for example, 78 milligram dilaudid pills a day. For someone who has no experience with opioids, how many of these pills could induce an overdose in your experience?
Oh, well, depending on the person, it could be, you know, five, 10 of them, or even less.
Hmm.
It really depends on the person.
Do you take issue with the way that the media has covered safer supplies so far?
Yes, there's a massive blind spot. They're not covering it enough, and when they do, they they never seem to cover the bits of it that are more raw and important. Because it's not just just a random thing. It is something that is happening systematically and at a large scale, and many people are suffering because of it, whether they understand it or not. When I was in
Mhm.
addiction, I thought it was a good thing. To me, I was worried about getting as many pills as possible. I thought it was a good thing, but then, it pushed my addiction to places where I never thought it would go. And I can only imagine how many people are stuck on them, or they get them and they just give them to somebody else because they have to, but it keeps their addiction going, and it doesn't really stop them from uh
Mhm.
from doing drugs and wean them off.
And for you, safer supply was obviously destructive. Throughout your time in addiction, with all of the addicts that you interacted with, did you see anyone who benefited from the safer supply program, or was it predominantly a destructive force in their lives?
It was predominantly destructive. It mainly fed into whatever addiction that they had, whether it was safe supply or whether it was fentanyl or crack. Most people would just get it to sell it, or just to get it. I didn't really meet anybody who was only taking one pill a day regularly and not selling any of their pills.
And how do you feel knowing that in Ontario, safer supply remains basically unregulated, that even in British Columbia, which has a far worse drug problem and far more relaxed drug policies, they've instituted more guardrails here.
Um, how do I feel about the guardrails here?
The lack of guardrails here.
Um, lack of guardrails. Yeah, I was um, I was thinking that no, I'm not surprised, but it's very disappointing. But from what I saw, somebody like me, right? To me, it doesn't surprise me at all, because if I was running the program, I wouldn't want any of this information to get out. I would be very worried about it. But it is something then they need to do. Eventually they need to get ahead of it. You know,
Mhm.
you can't just have it with no rules at all for forever, because people
Mhm.
who run pharmacies, people who run, clinics, they will be taking advantage of this program and are.
Yes,
If you
and
can make
unfortunately, in
loads
the
of
end, it's
money.
addicts who suffer when people profit off giving out limitless pharmaceutical opioids. Thank you for joining us on the show today, Callum.
Thank you for having me, Adam.
I think most Canadians can understand intuitively that giving out limitless pharmaceutical opioids is bad. So, why hasn't our government understood this as well? Who knows?